Good morning. Good morning, Kausthub. And thank you very much to dedicate some time to Pranamanas Yoga, to our school, to talk about one topic that it's very interesting because it is about the use of mantra, especially in healing process. But especially I want to thank you because you dedicate time today, that it is the Guru Purnima full moon day. And maybe can I ask you to share or a small chant just to dedicate to our gurus, and also maybe to explain shorter to our student what does it mean, why it's so important in also in yoga tradition.
Namaste, Grazia. Very, very nice to see you. And it is very, how do you say, for good fortune for both of us that we are having our meeting today on the auspicious day of Guru Purnima. Guru Purnima is considered the birthday of Vyasa. And it is also considered the birthday of Buddha, I think, in the Buddhist tradition called the Buddha Purnima. So I'm not sure about that, but I will stick to Vyasa's birthday. Vyasa is considered the teacher of teachers. In our tradition, all the he's what is called the Purva Acharya. That means the first Acharya, the first teacher. So that is why his birthday is auspiciously known as Guru Purnima. We will begin a small chant that usually is the chant dedicated to both the teacher and the student when they are beginning something auspicious, and this is from the Vedas itself. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanta Shanta Shanti. So you asked me also a question already. Why is it important for even those of us who are in the yoga tradition? Well, yoga is part of the Vedic philosophy, so that is one important reason. But more importantly, among the Vedic schools, there are different types of schools. And one of the schools, or one of the types, is called Anushasanam. And yoga is an Anushasanam. Patanjali already makes it very, very clear in the first sutra, Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Anushasanam is a technical term that talks about yoga being an Anushasana Shastra, a teaching that is to be followed. And when we say it has to be followed, it means we have to follow a teacher, where we have to find an acharya, get initiated by an acharya, and practice through the acharya's guidance. And this is very, very important because the topic we are going to talk about, especially called mantra, is also very significant because yoga is a system that very deeply includes mantra. And that is why every yoga teacher must actually be following an acharya, being initiated through the proper procedures and rituals so that the vessel is clean to not only practice mantra but also to have the capacity to teach mantra in the future. Yoga is an Anushasana Shastra, the same as mantra is an Anushasana Shastra, the same as language is an Anushasana Shastra. So in a certain way, it's a prerequisite that we honor an acharya, because an acharya is actually the one who initiates us into a mantra. So today when we are honoring our teacher, we actually are meant to remember our acharya who initiated us into our our mantra, our spiritual mantra, and of course all the way back to the first teacher Vyasa. And that's why it's very, very significant, because in yoga is a samantraka tradition. Yoga without mantra actually is impotent. It's only partially powerful. Whereas yoga with the initiation of mantra makes it even more potent and powerful. That's why it's very auspicious that we are meeting today. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Related to what you were saying just now, most of the yoga teacher in Western country, they don't use mantra as a tool during a yoga practice. They are not, most of them, they don't have a guru, they don't are initiated, and that's a big limitation in as you said. And as we are working in Pranamanas yoga, especially in yoga therapy, or in using tools that can help people reach a better holistic health through yoga. And so we have learned how to use mantra through you, but how can we say to other people, because most of the students we have, they don't know India, they don't know your culture, they don't know yoga, and they practice mantra without knowing what is a mantra. Maybe we can begin with that. What is a mantra? Because sometimes there is a big confusion.
Yeah. So there are different approaches to convince or address the people and inspire them to practice mantra. So even if you remove every devotional aspect of the mantra practice, mantras are essentially sacred syllables that hold a certain vibration in them and that has some power. Now, there are a few ways in which I would share with the students the power of mantra in practice, especially in healing practices. So in yoga and Sankhya philosophy, as well as in Ayurveda teachings, we are uh, talking about the evolution of our body, how our body evolves. And when we see how our body evolves, we go back to the foundation. We see that at the very, very base foundation, we are made up of, we are coming from what is called Shabda Tanmatra, a vibration. That is where we are all starting. So originally we are basically somehow a vibration which combines with other uh, subtle things and therefore becomes more grass form like our human body. So that's why sound is a very, very powerful tool, because when we use mantras, it reaches this subtle space called Shabda Tanmatra and can make changes in that very, very subtle part of us and therefore create some transformation from within. And this is why I think every spiritual tradition used mantra, because they saw the power of chanting. It's not, mantra is not only unique to the Vedic tradition. The Buddhists have mantra practices, the Christians have mantra practice, the Islam people have mantra practice, the Jewish people have mantra practice. Even the pagan religions, which are non-religious, they use mantra practices. their own mantras, because sound is such a powerful tool. That's one way of, I would say, convincing students to get inspired about mantra practice. Another way to look at mantra practices is that, especially in Sanskrit language, I would talk about, because our tradition is from Sanskrit language, we have syllables in Sanskrit language that are divided into five columns, each of one corresponding to an element. And we are made up of the five elements in one theory. And these five elements are somehow related with what we call the three gunas of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And in yoga and Ayurveda, we look at diseases as a disturbance of Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. So when we are wanting to re-establish the balance between the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, we are using some tools that will counter this. And therefore, recitation of these kind of mantras can be one of the tools that can very strongly have an influence in restoring the balance. And that is also how mantras can be a very powerful tool in healing. So I've seen that those who even don't believe in the spiritual dimensions of mantras, when they learn about these two aspects of mantras, they get very quickly inspired to practice mantra in their practice. And I have a lot of students who are not necessarily spiritual, but who practice mantra and who have gained from the practice of mantra.
So do you know, for example, what science or if there is some Western maybe study supports about the health benefit of mantra too?
To be very, very honest, I am not the best person to answer this question, because I don't feel the need to search for those kind of research. But I'm very, very sure if you search the internet, especially in the reliable sources, there will be enormous number of studies which will share this. Personally, for me, I believe in the testimony of time. So if a technique is working for thousands of years, over variety of populations, over a variety of geopolitical scenarios, there must be some validity to it. We don't need modern science to further validate it.
True, true. So can I ask you, because maybe some people that will hear or see this interview maybe is a little confused because they are not used to mantra. And how do you integrate mantras to a yoga practice? Because your tradition, especially coming from your grandfather, Krishnamacharya, he introduced another time, probably it was lost during a long time, he introduced another time the tool of mantra in yoga practice, asana, pranayama, meditation, and so on. How do you?
So
Yes.
it's very simple actually. When there are, I would say, uh, two stages or two ways in which we can introduce mantra in asana and pranayama practices. And the first stage is where we are teaching people to recite on the exhalation, the mantra, orally and loudly. This is usually the beginning stage, because in the beginning stage also we require people to recite the mantra loudly so that we can also verify if their pronunciation is correct. So normally when they are practicing asanas, they can do the movement on inhale and then the exhale movement. While they are doing it, they can recite the mantra. So this could be the initial stage of how we can introduce asana in mantra practice. The same can be done in pranayama practice as well, where when they are doing their inhalation, they are inhaling when they are exhaling, they recite the mantra. Of course, this is when we are able to breathe through the both nostrils, or not when we are doing regulation of the breath. Once this stage is uh, mastered, or let's say at least becomes familiar to the person, and they are able to do it more comfortably, then we go to the next stage where we ask the person to recite the mantra mentally. Now, once the mantra is recited mentally, they can recite it both during inhale and during exhale. So when we do asana practice, they can recite the mantra during inhalation mentally. They can recite the mantra mentally during exhalation as well. The same with pranayama. And what's even more fascinating is when we advance into the stage of mental recitation of mantra, we can also introduce retention of breath in asana and in pranayama, where they can also recite the mantra. So this is how in the old days mantras were integrated or incorporated in yogic practices. And that's why, as I said in the beginning, all yogic practices in the old days were samantraka, with the use of mantras. Because even in asana practices, the ancient yogis were not only breathing, but were reciting mantra as well, mentally. The same with pranayama practices. They were not just doing alternate nostril or, shitali or shitkari, but they were also reciting mantra during the inhale, during the hold after inhale, during the exhale, during the hold after exhale. And this is very, very important. So this is how, in two simple ways, we can start to understand how to use mantra in yogic practices.
So it's clear that using, especially when you recite mentally, it became like meditation practice. Also, if
Exactly.
maybe it's an asana practice or pranayama practice, your mind is so involved that and
Yes.
so centered. So maybe it is important also the bhavana. I mean, the visualization, or to know what is the meaning of the mantra that you are reciting, isn't it?
Yes. What in the old days they were doing was the teacher would not only initiate the mantra, but also give the feeling that we have to hold in our heart when we recite the mantra. I don't want to use the word visualization for bhavana. It's more like a feeling.
Yeah.
Because the word bhavana comes from the root bhu sattayam, to be, to become. So when we recite a sun mantra, for example, we don't just imagine a sun, but we feel the power of the sun, like the warmth of the sun, the light of the sun. We feel that. So when we do that, then we are combining the mind's involvement in that process as well. And so it becomes a very integrated practice of body, breath, and mind coming together. And so it's a very, very holistic practice. And that's the beauty of yoga practices, that it's holistic, and therefore it can reach many different dimensions.
Dimension. That's important. So I imagine that most of the people that is not familiar to mantra could ask, what kind of criteria do you follow to recommend a specific mantra for a person? That's
So here again, there are two different approaches. One would be for the spiritual initiation into mantra practice, which I think is not our topic now, because that is a completely different approach. But in the therapeutic topic, it depends on the illness mainly, and what is needed to counter the illness. So, for example, if somebody has a problem in digestion, we see that the fire element is weaker. We will initiate a mantra that has a strong element of fire so that the fire is more stimulated. Whereas in the same side, if the digestion problem is because the fire is too strong, then we will initiate the opposite element of water to balance the fire. So we will consider those kind of parameters to see whether we want to increase something or decrease something, what is needed. Like, for example, if somebody's got a nervous anxiety issue, which is a wind issue. That means the wind is too strong. And that's why their mind is also moving like the wind. The emotion is moving like the wind. We may give them a very grounding practice where the mantra could be that of a mountain, of an earth element, so that it's the opposite of the wind element, so that it's much more dense and much more grounding, so that it counters that wind movement. On the opposite side, if somebody is too stubborn and they are not very moving, they're very fixed in their approach, and that is why they are suffering. We may give something like the wind element or the water element that is flowing and moving, or an image of a mantra of something that is changing, like the moon, which is also changing every day, so that there becomes the flexibility that they are needed. And that's the beauty of mantra in practice, because we are not looking in yoga therapy only at the physical dimension. We are looking at it in a holistic way. So we will see where the work is needed. And depending on that, we will select appropriate mantras which are universal, so that everybody can practice, because the nature is common to everybody. Sun, moon is not specific to any religion. Mountain, earth is not specific to any religion. Wind, fire, all these are not specific to certain religions. So we will bring those kind of elements in their mantras mostly for those who don't believe in such kind of religious approaches. Whereas if they have a religious inclination, then we may be able to use certain mantras of certain deities that bring those attributes as well. So we have God of fire, God of water, God of wind, etc. And we could use those as well. But again, that's why in the Vedic tradition, we have so many mantras that can be suitable for any type of practitioner.
So we can say also that there is relating to what you began, a vibration, the vibration of Sanskrit language,
Yes,
as a connection, a direct connection with
correct,
the element that we are using.
correct.
I think it's really interesting also.
Yes. This is what, when I found out this, when I learned about this, it was so uh, like a revelation, because it was so magical that the ancient people had thought about language like this, connected to the elements, and it was incredible. And I feel so proud to be part of this Vedic culture that has this kind of information and wisdom. And the way they've structured the language and the mantras is just fascinating. So it's like a, a medical prescription,
Yeah.
except with sound.
Yes, 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 yes. And that is so interesting because yes, I think that probably sound like light. I mean, all that is related to something really subtle. That it's at the origin of matter. It's I would like it could be really in the future the really way to approach health, not chemical, that is going only on the physical part, but just make a connection to this part that it is our energetic field, and coming from the spiritual channel, that really our real nature.
Yes. And I think, even though I share your optimism about it, I think we will need a complementary approach. So mantra can be one of the additional tools, but sometimes we may also need some chemical help,
Yeah.
because we are living in a very, uh, I would say, in a very fortunate era where we can also take the advantages of modern medicine
Yeah.
and combine it with the wisdom of tradition, so that we can get the the synergetic power of all the traditions coming together. We take the positives. And that's the beauty of yoga because it's non-invasive. It can mix with every other tradition. So we can do mantra and medicine, no problem.
Good,
It will not fight with each other.
good, good. Can you share a therapeutic yoga case that maybe you remember where you have used a mantra and it had really important or good effect in the health of a person?
Well, it's
A
very
lot.
difficult in one way because in my recent times, I have not taught any class or therapeutic class without mantra.
So
Okay, so every class I teach is of mantra practices. But let me give you a specific example. So in the recent time, I have met actually one of my student who has been going through a very difficult time, especially with depression. And she has been suffering from a heavy depression because of certain uh, situations in the family and work front that has made her feel very dull and very heavy. And she feels like she's in a dark hole and that there is no hope.
yeah.
The only thing that was positive was that she had confidence that yoga could help her. And she's been a student of mine for long term, but recent events put her into this depressive mode. And she was, in fact, diagnosed as a clinically depressed by her doctor. And, she is taking some medication for that as well. As I said earlier, it is a complementary approach. And combined with that, we also started to develop a yoga practice with the sun as the element because sun is representing light, and both in terms of the opposite of heaviness, lightness, but also in the opposite of darkness, because she described herself as being in a dark space. So when we started working on this practice and she started doing this practice with the sun mantra in her practice, over a period of time, we could see that she became much more confident, much more optimistic, much more lighter. And it really helped her come out of this phase much more earlier. Even her doctor were a bit surprised that she could come out of her depression so quickly or move away from that. Of course, they were surprised, and then they reduced her medication and all that. And so she felt very, very optimistic about this. So this is one quick example that I am able to think about. At the same time, I don't want to say that the sun mantra will solve all depression problems. That's also something that we should not think of it as prescriptive, because this fit her situation. It doesn't mean that it will work as medicine for everybody else. Yoga is not a prescription, but it's much more a, how would you say, a refinement, an adjustment.
Yes, true, true, absolutely. And what is your personal experience with mantra?
Oh, actually, mantra has saved my life. So many years ago, I actually was very resistant to mantra practices. And also, I was probably not very open to it. I was not teaching any students mantra practices and things like that. Till at a particular time, the only chanting I was teaching was Yoga Sutra chanting. And I remember the time where it was the year 2012, and three different very, very big, how do you say, catastrophes happened in my life. They converged, three of them, and it was putting me in a very, very dark period of my life, perhaps the darkest period of my life so far. I don't know what else will come, and I wish it will not come again, this kind of darkness. Three things collided in my life, and it was very, very heavy. And I remember at that time, I consulted one of uh, uh, our family, I would say, well-wishers, who is actually my teacher now, uh, because my father could not help me. And that was one of the crises, because my father was not well, healthy. His health problems started at that time. So I lost my teacher at this time. So I went to consult Professor Padmanabhan. He was there, and he told me, you should start mantra practice. And he asked me to start practicing a certain mantra practice, and that is coming from our tradition, and that changed my life so dramatically. That changed my life so much. It brought me out of that uh, darkness that I was in. It was lifting me up, and it guided me eventually to clarity, to strength, and I rebuilt my life piece by piece in that. So that's one of the personal experiences. The second personal experience happened, actually, interestingly, it started in Spain. Like, you know the story, that one of my students innocently asked a question about something about my father, and then that day I got very restless, and then I realized the next day morning when I woke up that I had to start practicing the mantra that my father initiated me, which is a very sacred mantra for me and my tradition, my family tradition. And this was early in 2022. And since then, my life has taken even more changes in the last 2 years. And I've changed in the level of my body, I've changed in the level of my emotions, changed in the level of my spiritual, how do you say, being. So I attribute this only to mantra practice, because I've been doing asana, pranayama, and other things for many years. The only difference was there was something new with the mantra. So I have personally, I would say, transformed a lot because of mantra, and I'm sure that I will transform even more. So I am becoming much better because of mantra practice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to share your personal experience, that it's really
Thank you.
helpful. And I hope all this topic, in all some of this topic we were talking together, you could share in the seminar that we will do in September, at the beginning of September in Bilbao, or just an introduction. But all the students are interested in the therapeutic use and the practice, and so it's not just to Google a mantra. That most of the people now, it's going to
Right.
Google and ask a mantra for me. Just learn from a tradition.
We will do our best.
Yes,
And
yes.
hopefully we will provide a good framework for what are mantras, how to use mantras in yoga practices, and some examples of mantras and things, and how to apply it in certain contexts. We will explore all this and hopefully open the eyes of people to this wonderful field of mantras.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to dedicate time.
Namaste, gracia. Thank you so much.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Goodbye.
Take care. We will talk soon, Grazia. Namaste.